What if I told you there was a game that wasn't pay to win? Well, look no further. May I present Kenshi, the land of throbbing cocks being crammed into unconsenting asses. If you are looking for a game that would eviscerate your asshole and oddly enough leave you begging for more, look no further. I have logged hundreds of hours in Kenshi. I love this fucking game. I truly believe it's one of the few games that deserves your time. However, there are many things that could use improvement, especially with Kenshi 2 on the horizon. In this video, we will discuss the 10 places where Kenshi falls short and refinements that are hoped for in the next iteration. Kenshi is one of those few games that will make your heart pound as you're getting chased down with your arms recently broken, flopping around in the wind, and as you attempt to avoid the countless NPCs that will fuck your mouth given the opportunity. Seriously, look at that motherfucker wrong and see what happens. But again, with Kenshi 2 on the horizon, I decided to reopen the first iteration and give this game a second long playthrough. And although it was enjoyable, don't get me wrong, I sometimes can't help but feel it falls a little short in a few key aspects. But before we get into that, let's develop a baseline of the gameplay loop as a whole, and from there, pick out the areas it could improve in the sequel. For those of you who don't know, Kenshi was developed by Lo-Fi Games, a small 17-man/woman team based out of the UK. Kenshi started as a passion project by a visionary who worked as a night shift security guard, spending his days designing for what would become one of the most sold and most played games on Steam. It's truly an underdog rags to riches story, and you can see from the brutal gameplay and the unforgivingness of the developer's personal life reflected in the game. Whether that be managing your finances or leaving a game on fast forward a little too long, every action has very brutal consequences. With that out of the way, let's get into it. When I first started playing Kenshi, holy shit, I was shocked with how brutal this game is. You say to yourself, oh, I'm going to go on the hardest difficulty, I'm going to start naked, I'm going to go into town. However, you learn very quickly the world of Kenshi is a brutal, unforgiving, fuck your asshole hard hellscape of a world that will eat you up and spit you out with a couple of limbs missing. And then some slavers will come by, and that's it for your first playthrough, kiddo. Start over. To summarize the early game, essentially you're going to be subsisting off dead bodies, all the while sneaking around and trying not to be caught. The thing about it is, if you choose the most brutal start, which is rock bottom, where you start as an NPC with only one arm, no money, and no skills, it's a harsh existence. In my playthrough, I can't tell you how many times I was robbing stores just to be caught, beaten inches from my life, and then enslaved, where I toiled tirelessly on the brink of starvation. Eventually, you see an opening and you jet for the door just to get caught, beat the fuck up, and thrown back in a cage with little to no health, slowly healing, or you sneak your way out. However, once you escape, you are marked as an escaped slave, and the only way you can interact with anyone is if by the chance you can find a dead character and pick off their uniform. Kenshi's early game is really where Kenshi shines. The pure brutality mixed with the adrenaline pulsing moments of getting caught keep you jacked in and can quickly burn through dozens of hours as you claw your way up the Kenshi hierarchy. Only the strong in Kenshi survive. As you progress in the early stages, you have to be laser focused with complete situational awareness, as any small group of bandits or slavers or even peasants will mercilessly brutalize you, mushroom tap you on the forehead, and make you their slave bitch on sight. The mid-game of Kenshi is also still fun as hell, as you throw together a motley crew of characters which you can customize and make pretty wacky to say the least, all in an attempt to build your outpost at some point. Around the midway point, if you've made it into the Thieves Guild and you have a couple of proficient characters in the act of stealing, money quickly becomes a non-factor, and the skill of characters you recruit will be well worth the premium. With money as a non-factor, you start having your first big wins in the game. You buy a property, and you can actually start training your men with equipment and research structures, all of which will further enable your new faction to strive. This part of the game, though, is when it begins to slow down a bit, as your group has assigned tasks that take a decent amount of time to complete. To progress, you really need to sit at your computer and occasionally fight off bandits that will encroach on your territory. Sometimes in the mid-game, your party might be wholly captured, sold into slavery. However, if you play your cards right or save her back to a checkpoint, which I would not recommend because that's cheating, the game again becomes more of a slow burn. However, the late game of Kenshi is really where the game starts to fall apart. You quickly realize that you've mastered the art of making money, and by this point you've recruited a strong squad of fucking pipe hitters that can wreck any opponent that faces them. Your outpost is probably self-sufficient with a fuckload of harpoon guns, and it's very profitable. By this point, you have likely also pissed off every faction in the game and are marked kill on sight. The problem with Kenshi's endgame is, unlike the beginning where the player had to fight for every last commodity, Kenshi becomes overly plentiful and the challenge factor falls off a cliff. Once you have killed the Emperor, the main factions, fought the army, etc., the game for the most part leaves you to your own devices. Unfortunately, there's no way to conquer the entire map like in Mountain Blade. You can't capture cities, and once you've wiped out the inhabiting guards, which is super janky by the way, often rebels will move in or the other nations will fill the power vacuum, which is super cool, don't get me wrong, but there's no way to interact with this aspect of the game and drive player interaction. So yeah, that's a summary of Kenshi as a whole. You grind your way to the top, it's fucking brutal, but once you get there, an overarching feeling of now what sets in, and there's little to engage with. Granted, for any player, it was likely a long and fun journey to get there. However, it just starts losing replayability after this point. So now that we've covered the base gameplay of Kenshi, let's get into the 10 major issues that I feel should be addressed in the next Kenshi, and will truly make Kenshi 2 a legendary game, more so than the first. The difficulty level in Kenshi certainly could use a rebalance, with a lot of activities falling more toward RNG than skill. Some could argue that talent in Kenshi comes from the choices players make, whether that be making the right choice or being excellent at managing risk. For instance, always having a skeleton player in reserve at a tavern in case there's a mass casualty event. This will allow your whole faction to not be wiped out, and it's just nice to have. So although yes, this is a skill, I would like to see more skill based on the player's ability to manipulate character, whether that be choosing favorable terrain or going full Mountain Blade where you can control the character and partake in first-person hand-to-hand combat. Like, that shit would be so badass, especially with the ninja samurai aspects of Kenshi. Adding these mechanics would undoubtedly improve the early game's difficulty and not base the sole metric of skill based off player choices with no actual player skill inputs. Grinding up your character when using training dummies or sending them into a gladiator pit, again, way too slow. Training in Kenshi is a significant time restraint that can dissuade players from undertaking the more advanced elements of the game. I think Skyrim is a game that Kenshi can take notes from when it comes to ranking your character up, and maybe they can even add further skill boosts to armor or potions that will maximize your player's training when consumed, something like what The Witcher uses. In closing on this one, I think that maxing out player skills should be challenging but not impossible, and could use some fine-tuning or rebalancing. And as a side note, I also really liked in Skyrim, once your player was fully maxed out, it unlocked a master level ability, which added further depth and reason for actually maxing out your player's skills and putting in that last little bit of effort. I never invested in Kenshi's main story, and I didn't even know where to start. Kenshi seems to be severely lacking in the lore department, and all I know as a player who has put 200 to 300 hours into this game is it's post-apocalyptic and there are a bunch of different factions with samurai bullshit. I also am not one to pick up random books and just read them. I'm pretty dyslexic overall, and I don't like reading shit. So most of the time, if a player's not talking to me, I'm really not investing in the story. So maybe to tailor to less focused players like me, Kenshi could implement some voice acting and cutscenes just to immerse the player more in this world. Kenshi is a game that both capitalizes and suffers from the lack of direction. In the beginning, as I discussed, the main goal is essentially to survive, and I feel the player who would like a more structured experience, lore again would pay dividends to that audience of people. Give the player a world-ending adversary that would require the player to partake on a journey of transformation / struggle, all leading to a conclusion with the main boss fight, where after a lot of bullshit, the player is crowned the Emperor of Kenshi. I don't know, just something huge that the player can really dig their teeth into. And on top of that, change the game environment as the player progresses. On day one, sure, have the regular Kenshi world, world. But by day 100, scale it up to like apocalyptic shit going on, so the player knows they're running out of time to save the world and there's a sense of urgency. In the early game, players learn very quickly that you probably should download some mods if you want to have a more enjoyable experience. Again, Vanilla Kenshi is super grindy, whether leveling skills, interacting with merchants, or building your own base. Unfortunately, mods really do add value to this game. However, once you head down the modding path in Kenshi, you might find you're adding a little too much fluff to your game experience and be more ready to cut corners, like editing your player stats. Unfortunately, the game makes it really easy for players to cheese it without even downloading mods, which lies with the underlying problem of some of the mechanics just being broken. Sometimes you need to act as a developer and reset/fix your game. For instance, whenever you join the Shinobi Thieves Guild, if you get into trouble and run back into the guild, the NPCs will engage whoever's pursuing you because you're part of their faction now. However, this will cascade into all NPCs targeting the Thieves Guild in every city, resulting in their enslavement and eradication. The next thing you know, you don't have a consistent area to go and fence your items. So now you have to import your save game and reset the NPC deaths/relations. Overall, this aspect of the game needs to be fixed, and it shatters player immersion when you have to go import your game and completely reset all your faction relations. As you make your way through Kenshi's world, the map has many different biomes with different predators, environmental effects that can hurt the player. However, there doesn't seem like there's much effort put into this aspect of the game, and I think that seeing more of this would significantly impact the immersion. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple of areas that really blow players away. They're really crazy unique, they're cool, but they're pretty rare. And unless you're using Wikipedia, you're probably not going to find them until the mid to late game if you are to stumble across them. So the answer to this is just add more dungeons, add more roving games, and add more side quests that lead your players to these areas. The building in Kenshi is awful, and I think the game would benefit significantly if this was reworked and made into a more streamlined process. It's not as bad as Fallout 4, don't get me wrong, but it leaves much to be desired as characters can quickly become stuck and unable to complete tasks. A significant way to fix this would be to enable some sort of building free cam, like in the Halo Forge mode, where the focal point is the object in question and the player can better micro adjust it and manipulate the object. I don't know, this wasn't a massive thing for me, but I got really annoyed when building my outpost as things just looked crooked as hell. There was no way to consistently place buildings or machines, and I just had to eyeball things, and I can never make them straight. This is more of a quality life improvement, but I think it would make the whole building process much more enjoyable. And as a side note, the random sandstorms and dust storms really were annoying to me, but that's just me. I would like a way to turn them off. Moving items in Kenshi is brutal. Yes, you can shift click stacks of items, which is nice, but there's no way to mass select items, which becomes a real pain in the ass when you have a caravan of pack mules or whatever the fuck these things are, and you're trying to transfer goods quickly. This aspect of the game would be significantly improved from a mass selection moving tool, whether that's a box that selects items or a hotkey. It's a straightforward fix, however, it would likely save hours for players who log a lot of time on this game. The combat in Kenshi is interesting, to say the least, with stats being a major driving force behind winning and losing fights. Overall, the combat isn't bad. It's really fun to watch, but if there was more player input, either hard or soft, I think it would really clean it up. Currently, players know if they are winning or losing a battle by how many green versus red numbers are popping up, and both sides mostly just mash together. Refining this critical aspect of the game and making it more interactive would significantly affect the player's ability to have an actual say in what happens, and immerse the player more in the bloody/gory fights that often occur. Kenshi is unique with how mashy and janky these battles can get, and they often become an all-out slugfest with arms arms and legs popping off, with characters crawling away while being pummeled with like blood trails behind them. It's hilarious to watch. It's super fun. However, if there was a little more input and more structure, I think it would really clean up this aspect of the game and go a very long way. The graphics in Kenshi, again, are unique. And the game had been worked on for 12 years, but man, some of these items could use some love and touching up. It's really fun to make a fucking hideous character in Kenshi with a jacked up ass face, an unproportioned body, and it's just kind of cool to watch him exist and move around and fight. It's sad, but it's pretty cool, and I don't think that should ever be taken out of the game. But perhaps transitioning this game to a newer engine where trees don't just pop in on top of players and everything looks like really poorly done paper mache, I think it would do wonders to the depth of the game and again really suck players in. Overall, Kenshi is a crazy, unique, and fun game. And if you're into open world survival, looting, / stat grind, give it a try. However, I would really like to see some of these minor and more significant improvements in the upcoming release. And again, at the end of the day, we really do have to cut the title some slack, as it was produced by a tiny team, and at one point, just one guy. However, now that it's made over 25 million and it has a massive fan base, hopefully they can get their hands on some more funding and make the next title exponentially better than the last, and add things to the game that they didn't have the time or money to do in the first one. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and as always, take it easy.